Thank you. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you. Have a seat. Thank you very much. I'll only give you 10 more minutes to do that. So, I was thinking in the back as I was listening to the pastor pray, there is so much bad news all over the stations. Would y'all agree with me? Yes. But did anybody turn to ESPN at the end of the National Softball Championship and watch the Oklahoma softball team talk about the joy of the Lord being their strength? I was so excited. I was so excited to know that we live in a nation where we are free to praise the living God whose Son is Jesus Christ. And to watch that happen with these cute young ladies talking about not winning the national championship, but something more important. And when I think about that, I say that to say this, that as the guy, if you may have heard part of my story on TV or someplace, but as a guy who was raised in the Deep South, in a single-parent household, mired in poverty, my parents divorced when I was 7 years old, and we moved into my grandfather's house, a man who was born in 1921 in a segregated South Carolina, a very different world than I grew up. But what he told me as just a little kid was that faith in God, faith in each other, and faith in what America could be would keep you from becoming bitter and make you better. To have someone who saw the challenges and the atrocities and the depth of humanity in a negative way, look at me as a kid struggling and remind me that because I'm American, because we live in the freest, fairest land on God's green earth, that all things were possible. What a blessing to be an American. And no matter how hard we think we have it today, we are the nation that fought a civil war to set people free. We are the nation that won World War I and World War II, went into the Korean conflict in Vietnam, because we wanted to make sure that freedom spreads throughout the world. We went through Desert Storm to make sure we keep fighting for the right causes. I'm running for President of the United States because I believe, I know, America can do for anyone what she's done for me. I'll tell you, my story is not the story where the silver spoon is present. It was the plastic spoon. Can I get an amen in the house of the Lord? Yes. You see, I believe in America not because I had all the things that went right. I actually believe in America because I was blessed with a miserable beginning. I don't have the luxury of telling you the story. There's a college president, the Republican college president. Is he still here? Where is he? Yes, there he is, young man up there. He's a nice guy. He's been around a couple of my speeches, and he's going to graduate cum laude from college. I graduated thank you laude from college. There's a difference between the two of us, right? So I had to struggle my way to where I am today. And I'll tell you, as a kid who was kind of hopeless and lost as a goose in a rainstorm sometimes, I didn't do very well all the way. As a freshman in high school, I basically failed out. I failed 4 subjects my freshman year because life had accumulated on my shoulders, so much so that I was losing hope on what was possible. The 4 subjects were world geography and civics. Now, civics is the study of politics. Tells you God has a sense of humor. Now, I will say this too. After 10 years in the United States Senate, I am not the only one in Washington, D.C. who failed civics. A whole lot of people on the left ain't got it right yet. No question about it. No question about it. I also failed Spanish and English. Lord have mercy. When you fail Spanish and English, no one calls you bilingual. Not a soul. They all call you ignorant because you can't speak any language. That's where I found my unhappy self. But I had 2 major blessings at that time. One was a praying mama who believed that all things were possible because her daddy taught her. And she would come home, she was a nurse's aide, so she made a little bit more than minimum wage. She had 2 of us in the house. And Senator, I'll tell you, she'd come home after 16-hour shifts, double shifts, changing bedpans and rolling patients. Not a glamorous job. But it's my mama who taught me that there's dignity in all work. Therefore, if you are able-bodied, you work. Period. That's the American standard. That's how we do it in America. It should be, exactly. It should be if you are able to take care of yourself, do it. And my mama, she taught me that. And she'd come home 11:30 at night after 2 shifts. She'd look at me. She'd look at my report card. Then she'd look back at me. And then she'd say the sweetest little thing. She would say, "Baby." I said, "Yes, ma'am." She said, "If you just shot for the moon, even if you miss, you'll be among the stars." If she said that once, she said it 1,000 times. At the end of my freshman year, she came home, looked at my report card. She looked at me, and she said, "Baby." I was like, "I know, Mama. I should have shot for the moon." She's like, "No, sweetheart, you missed that lesson." I said, "What?" She said, "Let's go outside." So she walked me over to a tree. She said, "Why don't you pick a branch?" I think y'all know where this story is going. She said, "Take the leaves off." She introduced me to a new form of encouragement. Now, in the Deep South, I say a switch is a Southern apparatus of encouragement. And she helped me out a lot. Let me just leave it right there. And then my second blessing was this guy named John Moniz. John was a conservative Christian who happened to be a Republican. And he ran the local Chick-fil-A. And John started telling me things I had never heard before. He said, in order to be successful in this country, you don't have to play football. You don't have to be an entertainer. He says, you can think your way out of poverty. Not to suggest that people who are in poverty aren't thinking, but to suggest that Tim Scott, the guy he was talking to, who nearly failed out as a freshman, was not applying myself academically. He said, "Son, having a job would be good, but creating jobs would be better." He said, if you want to buy your mom a house one day, it's not going to happen just because you have a good income. He says, you need to know the difference between a profit and an income. An income will establish your lifestyle, but a profit can change your entire community. John Moniz, the Chick-fil-A operator, started telling me things I had never thought of before. And because of John Moniz, I am standing here before you today because one of the lessons that John taught me was, he said, he has a poor kid, you're going to have to learn what he called the principle of Luke 6:38. Before asking to receive, you must understand the power of giving. And as a poor kid, you will have to give your time because you don't have the resources to give. So I took him at his word, and he says, here's an area that you already seem to enjoy. You like student government. You have a knack for talking. All your teachers say you talk too much in the middle of the classroom. He was right. And so I took the time and found that by working at the polls and being a poll worker and working on other campaigns, that I actually had a passion for public service however I could do it. And it was because of John Moniz and the lessons he taught me that I found myself getting more and more invested in politics. And the last lesson he taught me was such an important lesson. He said, if you want to be successful in life, one of the hardest things you're going to have to do is to look in the mirror and blame yourself. He said, you can't blame your mom because she's working 16 hours a day. You can't blame your dad who's not around. He says, for you to succeed, you are going to have to take individual responsibility for what happens next. If you see the problem in the mirror, you've just uncovered the promise. If you see the obstacle there, you are looking at the opportunity. John taught me that individual responsibility was a necessary component for my success. And unfortunately, in today's America, it seems like the new law or the new drug is a drug of victimhood. Everybody's a victim. But when you start taking the drug of victimhood, it comes with the narcotic of despair. That leads to a culture of grievance that feels like quicksand to so many Americans. Bless you. My mama said you got to bless them when they sneeze. So I can't think of anything more toxic for our culture than grievance and victimhood and despair. The antidote is individual responsibility or personal responsibility. Most of the things that we face in this nation, we can cure by taking responsibility for ourselves. I'll give you two examples. I'll take lots of questions, and then we'll continue. Two things I'd say. Number one, if you want to see the manifestation of this culture of grievance, you can go to most schools and watch the kids be indoctrinated and not educated. We're teaching CRT and not ABC. We locked the kids out of the classroom during COVID, and now we're locking the same kids out of their future because there's a force in this nation, a radical force from the far progressive left, that wants our kids to believe that we live in an evil, declining country. The American people are strong, but our government is weak. And the second thing I'll tell you is in order for us to restore hope and create opportunities and protect the America that we love, we have to close our southern border today. As President of the United States, one of the first actions I would take is to continue the finishing of the southern border wall. The second action I would take on our southern border is to stop the flow of fentanyl across our border, leading to 70,000 dead Americans. I gotta tell you, if you're like me and most Americans, you know someone who's lost their lives to fentanyl, or you know someone's kid who's lost their lives to fentanyl. My good friend Alan Shaw, who is the business dean at the College of Charleston, his son, Alan Shaw II, about 2 months ago, 27 years old, first experience, is gone. I think sometimes our government thinks of numbers. This is too serious of an issue. I want to think about, I'm fighting to make sure that my friends' children don't die. And if we take it that seriously, we will find, for $5 billion, I have legislation, and I would enact it as president. For $5 billion, we have the technology available to have surveillance on our southern border and our ports of entry to stem the tide of fentanyl. The precursors come from China, manufactured in Mexican labs, and the Mexican cartels bring them across the borders. We deserve better, but we need a president who doesn't back away from the fight, but saves American lives because we can. This is doable. $15 billion and a budget of $5 trillion. Actually, revenues of $5 trillion. This current president wants to spend $7 trillion, even though we bring in $5 trillion. But he can't find $15 billion to finish the wall and to surveil our border. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and make this into a dialogue, not a monologue, and get to your questions. Thank you so much for taking your time to show up here. I want to answer real questions from real people, so if you're paid to be here, if you're a reporter or somebody else paid to be here, I don't want to talk to y'all. Do y'all agree with me? Let's talk to real people about their issues. So thank you all for being here. I'm going to start here. Now, if that happens again, I'm not going to answer your question. So we're just going to go to the next question over here somewhere. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I grew up in Southern California.
Yes, ma'am.
I lived in Portland.
Ooh.
I'm supposed to be in Seattle.
So you've escaped.
Yeah, but it's depressing because everywhere I live is ruined.
Yes.
What would you do?
Well, the first thing you have to do is start by responding to the crises that we're seeing around the country. When you just named the left coast. I mean, some people call it the west coast, but the left coast, right? And what we're seeing coming out of California, there's reports today about the number of people and businesses that are fleeing the state of California. The problem is that they're taking their blue voting cards with them. That's why Texas and Idaho and many other states are becoming purple or starting to change their hue. One of the things that we have to do is to have a president who stands up and leads our nation by telling the truth of who we are. When I talk about the indoctrination in our classrooms, it leads to the indoctrinated becoming our leaders. That is toxic, corrosive, and poisonous. It can be changed by a president who does not retreat from the battle, but who leans into it. And many of the regulations that we're seeing today, particularly from the environmental front, the genesis is in California. I met with folks just yesterday who say the standards that they want us to achieve by the year 2032 aren't achievable. So we have to know that, but we have to actually tell people that as well. We need an American who articulates the truth and speaks to the American people about what is possible, and then talk about what is impossible, and work towards an era of exponential innovation where we become the masters of our own fate, the captains of our own ship. But that requires resolve. And we have to do battle. Another example is in California, they have this law that they called ABCs, which basically has to do with the ability to tell employers and workers what the relationship looks like. I have legislation that battles their progressive approach to eliminating the right to work laws around the country. Their goal is to eliminate the 27 states who use the right to work laws to attract more businesses. I want to make sure that our nation has the privilege and the right to choose their own environments, every state doing so, not taking the progressive left and allowing that to metastasize across our country. Yes, sir.
Senator, in regards to the military.
Thank you for your service, by the way.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, sir.
We've got problems in the military.
We do.
And I'd like to maybe hear what you would do as Commander-in-Chief to, number one, get the recruiting back up so folks want to join, and make it a formidable opponent to hopefully prevent conflict in the country.
Yeah. What are we going to do about the military? A couple things I'd say. Number one, thank you for your service. For every veteran in the house today, thank God for your service. Number two, our military is not a place for social experimenting. That's a big problem. When you take your eye off the ball, someone gets hurt. And unfortunately, when it's the military, someone gets killed. We need to have the most lethal fighting force on God's green earth. That means that we need to focus on lethality and nothing else. And that is not what's happening in today's military. I was on the Senate Armed Services Committee a few years ago. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee. The one thing I can tell you about the world today, it is more dangerous, more volatile, less certain than in my lifetime. We need to have a military able to engage in conflict if necessary on 3 different continents at the exact same time. If we cannot, we are not prepared. That means that the $860 billion that we're spending today on the military is not enough. This is one area that we need to grow our expenditures in order to meet the challenges that we have coming forward. The second thing I have to say is that part of the social experimentation I'm talking about is embedded in our military are the philosophies of the ESG, if you're familiar with those, and the DEI, along with other issues as well. We have to get back to what I call the tackling and blocking. War fighting is our primary objective. I say that though I didn't serve, both of my brothers did. My ugly brother, everybody's got one, you know. My ugly brother he went to the Air Force Academy and spent 26 years as a colonel in the Air Force. My good-looking brother, I wish it was me, but it's not. 32 years as a command sergeant major in the U.S. Army. My dad, I didn't grow up with him, but 27 years in the U.S. Air Force. 85 years of military experience. And here's what they say. We can only focus on the priorities of making sure America remains safe so the people are at peace. When we have leaders, when you swear the oath, you abide by it. Nothing else. So let me be a little more specific on the challenges that we face, and I'll wrap this question up pretty quickly. Sorry, but this is a really important question. Number one, China is not our friend. They are our adversary. The only question is, today is economic, tomorrow it will be militarily, if we do not continue to build up. Ronald Reagan was right. Peace through strength. You have to have a powerful military prepared for battle if you want to have peace. There are a lot of, I don't mean this negative, and some of us may disagree, but there are a lot of pacifists that believe that you get peace by pulling back. You actually get peace by having the most powerful weapons on earth. People take a second look, and you need a strong commander-in-chief who understands that necessity. That leads me to the next point. China is developing hypersonic weapons at a clip we are not. We are still the most powerful fighting force on earth. But the competition is coming very, very fast. We are not thinking about the conflicts around the globe like the Chinese are. Major issue. The Secretary of the Air Force, I believe it was, when I was on the Armed Services Committee, says, we can't defend it if we can't see it. And with the hypersonic weapons, we can't see it. We don't have the defense, the missile defense systems yet to deal with those. So we are in a strong but tough position when it comes to the hypersonic competition. The cyber issue and quantum computing is becoming a real threat for our military because our secrets won't be so secret in a world of quantum computing that is between 3 and 10 years away. So we have some real technological challenges. We have recruitment challenges, in part because no one wants to follow the science. COVID and vaccines is the science I'm talking about. You can't tell our kids it's a 10-day mask and a 5-day mask. We got to tell the truth. And about 40% of the recruits come from the Deep South. Well, we're not showing up anymore. You kick people out, and then you let them back in, but you don't get the bonus that you lost when you got out. We need to quit experimenting with our military. Those are 3 very concrete examples. And then finally, whether it's Made in China 2025, whether it's a Belt and Road project, whether it's them stealing our intellectual property, whether it's them spying on our kids, whether it's buying up farmlands, whether it's balloons breaching our sovereign borders, that must cease to exist as secret bases in Cuba. It's a problem we need to solve. Yes, sir.
Senator, thank you so much for your message of hope. We need to hear that. We're waiting here in Iowa for our Supreme Court to decide on our heartbeat law. And that'll come out the next 2 weeks before the end of the month. As someone who believes life begins at conception, that in a short period of time after that, within 6 weeks, we see evidence of heart activity, organ formation, response to pain. What is the role of the federal government when it comes to this life issue, and particularly in regards to abortion?
Yeah, thank you, sir. So I would say, importantly, that my personal position and my voting record are the same. I believe that life has intrinsic value because it comes from God. I have 100% pro-life voting record. I'm 100%. Thank you. I'm 100% pro-life conservative. I believe that we have to win the hearts and minds of the American people for us to get conservative legislation through the body, Congress. I celebrate the culture of life being created in states. If I was president of the United States, I would start the conversation with a limit of 15 weeks and then try my best to win the hearts and minds of the American people to get it any more conservative. And I say that to say this because I think it's really important to be honest. Today, as the guy who sponsored the 20-week bill, no chance of getting that through Congress because today's Congress is not interested in how conservative you can be. Today's Congress is interested on how late term the abortion can be. That's why the Democrats in the body today voted for abortions up until the day of delivery. And so from federal perspective, I think my primary objective would be to create a limit where late term abortions is impossible in the United States of America, number one. And number two, to get us out of the category of China and North Korea as it relates to it. And if, in order to go more conservative, you have to engage the American people and follow the science. If we do that, we will have more conservative legislation. But if we don't do that, even the 15 or the 20 week is not possible. As you know, because I think some folks here today met with Heritage Foundation, as well as Susan B. Anthony. Susan B. Anthony, the premier group on life issues, has said very clearly that the 15-week limit is where the conversation starts, and as soon as you can go more conservative, great. States are doing that already. The federal government, our responsibility is to battle late-term abortion starting today, especially with states considering not just talking about it, but embedding it in the laws of our country. Yes, sir.
Yeah, welcome to Pella.
Thank you.
How can we be assured that we'll have an honest and fair election?
Good question. Election integrity is an issue on the minds of lots of people who want to vote. This is good. I will say that one of the things, number one, you look back and look forward, I think both are very important. I think we should spend as much time, proportionally speaking, as the rearview mirror as we do to the windshield. So the future is very bright and getting better, especially when you think about the laws that have changed since the 2020 election. I'll just give you one really good example, though this is a trend throughout the country, specifically in red states. So Georgia's state voting laws was the poster child of conservative change brought to us because of a porous or challenging voting experience in 2020. They went to mail-in ballots in 2020 that allowed for those ballots to be mailed in without any signature verification. That sounds like an elevated likelihood of fraud. I figured it did, right? Also, around the country, Pennsylvania, also their Supreme Court ruled to allow for mail-in ballots to go out during that election and make the new changes for future elections. So you had a few 100,000 ballots with no system in place to allow those ballots to be counted appropriately. And then most of us are familiar with the ballot harvesting concept that was in the federal legislation that the Democrats wanted to use to allow for, to nationalize our elections. The Constitution is very clear. Elections are local issues.